You think he forgot you because he stopped calling. You think he moved on because he became cold, distant, silent. But what most people never understand is that silence does something powerful to the human mind. When someone who was always available suddenly disappears emotionally, the absence becomes louder than the presence ever was. And that is the moment everything begins to change. See, when you keep chasing someone, texting first every day, explaining your worth, trying to convince them to care, you leave no space for them to feel your absence. You become predictable, accessible, emotionally available at every second, and sadly, human beings often take for granted what they believe will never leave. That's why the more you beg for attention, the less valuable your attention starts to feel. Not because you are worthless, but because constant availability removes mystery, removes tension, removes emotional impact. But the moment you pull your energy back, something shifts. When your phone stops lighting up their screen, when your name disappears from their notifications, when your attention is no longer feeding their ego, the silence begins to speak for you. Suddenly, they start wondering where you went. They begin remembering the little things they ignored when you were always there. Your laugh, your support, your loyalty, your presence. Because absence has a way of revealing value that constant access hides. And this is where most people make a mistake. They think silence is a game. It's not about pretending not to care while secretly waiting for a message every 5 minutes. Real silence is different. Real silence comes from choosing yourself, from deciding that your peace matters more than forcing someone to recognize your worth. Because the truth is, when you stop chasing validation, you start becoming unforgettable. People feel energy. They feel desperation. They feel attachment. And when someone knows they can lose you forever, that certainty they once had begins to collapse. That's when curiosity enters their mind. They start checking your social media more often. They read old conversations. They wonder if someone else has your attention now. And the craziest part? The less you try to force their attention, the more naturally their attention returns, because silence creates reflection. For the first time, they are left alone with their own thoughts. No emotional reassurance from you. No constant reminders that you still care. Just space. And in that space, reality hits differently. They begin to experience what life actually feels like without your energy in it. That's when regret slowly starts building. Not always immediately. Sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes months. But eventually, the emotional comfort they once ignored becomes impossible to replace. And while they are sitting there trying to understand why your absence suddenly feels so heavy, you should be rebuilding yourself. Growing, healing, becoming stronger emotionally, mentally, spiritually, because the goal was never to manipulate someone into returning. The goal was always to remember your own value first. And ironically, that is exactly what makes people come back, not the begging, not the emotional paragraph, not proving your worth over and over again. It's the silence that finally makes them hear what your presence truly meant. There comes a moment after heartbreak when you realize something painful. Love alone is not enough. You can love someone deeply and still be disrespected. You can give your whole heart and still be taken for granted. And the reason this happens so often is because many people confuse love with self-abandonment. They think loyalty means tolerating confusion. They think patience means accepting emotional neglect. They think fighting for someone means sacrificing their dignity just to keep a connection alive. But the moment you begin respecting yourself again, everything changes because self-respect is not loud. It does not beg. It does not chase someone who keeps choosing distance. It does not constantly explain its value to people determined not to see it. Self-respect quietly says, I know what I deserve, and I refuse to settle for less. And that energy is powerful. See, when someone knows they can mistreat you without consequences, they slowly stop appreciating your presence. If every broken promise is forgiven instantly, if every moment of disrespect is tolerated, if every cold response still receives warmth from you, they learn that no matter how they behave, you will stay. And once people feel guaranteed access to your heart without earning it, they stop protecting it. That's why standards matter. Not because you want to punish anyone, but because your heart deserves protection too. You were never created to beg for consistency, loyalty, effort, or basic emotional care. The right connection will never require you to destroy yourself just to maintain it. And the strongest thing you can do after being hurt is not revenge. It's refusing to lower your standards out of loneliness, because loneliness makes people negotiate with their own worth. It makes them accept half-effort conversations, delayed replies, mixed signals, temporary affection, and emotional confusion just to avoid being alone. But every time you tolerate behavior that hurts your spirit, you send a message not only to them but to yourself that your pain is acceptable. And eventually, your soul becomes exhausted from carrying relationships that no longer carry you back. But when you finally say, enough, something shifts inside you. You stop trying to convince people to choose you. You stop shrinking your standards just to keep someone comfortable. You stop over-explaining your feelings to people committed to misunderstanding you. And strangely, that is often when they begin seeing your value clearly for the first time. Because confidence changes perception. The version of you that begged for attention was easy to overlook. But the version of you that walks away peacefully, the version that chooses dignity over desperation, that version becomes unforgettable. People are drawn toward energy that respects itself. Not arrogance, not ego, quiet confidence. The kind that no longer fears losing someone at the cost of losing themselves. And this is what many people don't realize. When someone sees that you are no longer emotionally available for inconsistency, they begin questioning the access they once had to you. They notice your absence differently because your energy no longer feels controllable. Suddenly, the person they thought would always wait no longer waits. That realization hits deeply, not because you became colder, but because you became stronger. Because you finally understood that real love should never require you to abandon your self-worth to receive basic respect. And sometimes the moment you stop accepting less than you deserve is the exact moment they realize what they lost. Most people think a glow-up is about appearance. They think healing means posting better pictures, dressing differently, making someone jealous, proving that you're doing better without them. But the most powerful transformation is never external first. Real transformation happens in silence, deep inside your mind, your habits, your energy, and your emotional control. Because anyone can change their image for a moment, but very few people change their spirit. And that's the difference people can feel. See, after heartbreak, many people become obsessed with being seen. They want the other person to regret leaving. They want revenge through success. They want attention, validation, reactions. But when your healing depends on somebody watching you, you are still emotionally attached to their opinion. You are still allowing their presence to control your peace. Real growth begins the moment you stop performing your healing and actually start living it. When you no longer wake up checking if they viewed your story. When you stop replaying old conversations in your head every night. When you stop stalking their life, comparing yourself to new people around them, or waiting for signs that they miss you. That is when your energy starts changing. Not because the pain disappears instantly, but because your focus finally returns to yourself. And that shift is powerful, because emotional peace creates a different kind of confidence. It's calm. It's grounded. It doesn't need to prove anything. You stop reacting emotionally to every little thing they do, because your happiness is no longer tied to their attention. You begin protecting your energy instead of constantly draining it, trying to keep someone emotionally connected to you. That's when people notice the difference. Not because you suddenly became perfect, but because you became harder to shake emotionally. Your presence feels lighter. Your conversations feel calmer. Your mind feels clearer. And most importantly, you stop carrying desperation in your energy. Because desperation always pushes people away. But peace attracts. See, the strongest glow-up is when someone can no longer control your emotions the way they used to. When they realize you are smiling genuinely again, sleeping peacefully again, building your life again. Not to impress them, but because you finally remembered that your life still matters even after disappointment. And ironically, that is often when they start paying attention again. Because people can sense when your energy changes. They can feel when you no longer need validation from them. The emotional attachment they once depended on slowly disappears, and suddenly they begin wondering what happened. The person who once chased them is now focused on growth. The person who once waited around is now building a future, and that emotional independence becomes magnetic. But understand this clearly. Your glow-up should never be about making someone regret hurting you. If revenge is still the goal, healing has not fully happened yet. True healing is when you stop needing revenge at all, when your happiness becomes more important than proving a point, when your peace matters more than winning someone back. Because at the end of the day, the greatest transformation is not becoming more attractive to them. It's becoming emotionally free from the version of you that believed your worth depended on being chosen by someone else. And once you reach that level of peace, your energy speaks louder than anything you could ever say. One of the hardest truths to accept about human nature is this. Many people do not fully appreciate what they have until they experience life without it. While you were giving your love, your time, your loyalty, your emotional support, they became comfortable. Comfortable with your presence. Comfortable with your effort. Comfortable knowing you would still care even after being ignored, misunderstood, or emotionally neglected. And comfort has a dangerous way of blinding people to value, because when someone is always there, they stop imagining life without them. That's why so many people realize your importance only after the connection is gone. Not because your value suddenly increased overnight, but because your absence finally forced them to feel what your presence was truly worth. The warmth they once ignored becomes impossible to replace. The emotional safety they took for granted suddenly becomes rare, and the silence you leave behind starts echoing louder than all the moments they overlooked while you were still around. At first, they may appear fine. They distract themselves. They convince themselves they made the right decision. They bury emotions under pride, attention, temporary excitement, or new distractions. But eventually, reality catches up. Because distractions only delay emotions, they never erase them. And then comparison begins. Every new conversation reminds them of your depth. Every shallow connection reminds them of your loyalty. Every temporary moment reminds them of the peace they once had with you. They start noticing the little things they ignored before. The way you listened, the way you cared, the way you supported them without asking for much in return. Suddenly, what once felt ordinary becomes irreplaceable. And this is why emotional absence is powerful. Not because it manipulates people, but because distance creates perspective. Sometimes people need to lose access to your energy before they understand how deeply it impacted their life. While you were constantly available, they never had to sit with the fear of losing you. But once your presence disappears, their mind starts revisiting memories they once overlooked. That's when regret slowly enters. Not always dramatically. Sometimes it arrives quietly at night, in moments of loneliness, in moments when life becomes heavy and they realize the person who once brought them peace is no longer there. And the hardest part for them is realizing they may have lost someone who genuinely loved them while chasing temporary emotions or feeding their ego. But while they are slowly recognizing your value, your responsibility is not to pause your life waiting for their realization. Your responsibility is to continue growing, because this is where many people lose themselves again. The moment the other person starts returning emotionally, they immediately abandon their healing just to reopen old wounds. But remember this, someone missing you does not automatically mean they are ready to love you correctly. Regret and growth are not always the same thing. That's why your healing matters more than their return, Because if they truly come back, it should not be because you stayed emotionally broken, waiting at the same place they left you. It should be because they found a stronger version of you. Someone who now understands their own worth, their own standards, and their own emotional value. And sometimes, the distance that made them realize your importance is the same distance that teaches you never to abandon yourself again. The moment you stop needing someone to choose you, you become powerful again. And that is what most people misunderstand about detachment. They think detachment means becoming cold, heartless, or pretending not to care. But real detachment is not about losing emotions. It's about no longer allowing your emotions to control your self-worth. Because when you are emotionally dependent on someone's attention, you lose yourself without realizing it. Your mood depends on their replies. Your peace depends on their consistency. Your confidence depends on whether they stay or leave. And slowly, without noticing, you hand your emotional power over to another person. That's why heartbreak feels so devastating sometimes. Not only because you lost someone, but because you forgot how to feel whole without them. And the more desperate someone becomes to hold on, the more the connection usually slips away. People can feel attachment that comes from fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of being replaced, fear of ending up alone. And when your actions are driven by fear, you start over-texting, over-explaining, overthinking, and over-chasing. You try to force closeness. You try to hold together something that is already emotionally drifting apart. But love forced through desperation never feels peaceful. It feels heavy. That's why detachment changes everything. Because detachment says, I care about you, but I will not destroy myself trying to keep you. It creates emotional balance. It allows you to love without begging, to care without losing dignity, to walk away when necessary without feeling like your entire identity disappeared with the relationship. And strangely, this is often the moment the dynamic shifts. The person who once felt certain they had emotional control over you suddenly feels uncertainty for the first time. Your reactions become calmer. Your attention becomes less predictable. Your energy no longer revolves around their approval. And when someone realizes they can no longer control your emotions the way they used to, they begin seeing you differently, because emotional independence is attractive, not because it plays games, but because it radiates strength. There is something unforgettable about a person who can love deeply and still maintain self-respect. A person who does not collapse every time they feel ignored. A person who continues building their life instead of pausing it for someone else's indecision. That kind of energy changes everything. You start focusing on your purpose again, your goals, your health, your future. The parts of yourself that were neglected while you were busy trying to save a connection. And little by little, your confidence returns. Not because someone validated you, but because you rebuilt yourself from within. And while you are rebuilding, the other person often begins feeling the emotional distance they once created. Because the attention they depended on is no longer constantly feeding them reassurance. The emotional access they once had so easily now feels uncertain, and uncertainty creates reflection. But here is the most important part. Detachment is not something you do to make someone come back. If your only goal is manipulation, then you are still emotionally trapped. Real detachment happens when your peace becomes more important than the outcome. When you genuinely understand that your happiness cannot depend on whether someone stays or leaves, because the truth is, the strongest position in any relationship belongs to the person who knows they will be okay either way. And once you reach that level of emotional freedom, you stop chasing love and start attracting respect. At the beginning of heartbreak, all you want is for them to come back. You replay memories in your head. You imagine the apology, the message, the moment they finally realize your value and return with the love you always deserved. You convince yourself that if they came back, everything would finally feel okay again. And for a while, that hope becomes the only thing keeping you emotionally attached to the past. But healing does something unexpected to a person. It changes what you are willing to accept. Because while you are busy rebuilding yourself, learning your worth, protecting your peace, and rediscovering who you are outside of that relationship, your standards quietly evolve. The version of you that once tolerated inconsistency slowly disappears. The version of you that begged for attention becomes unrecognizable. And one day, without even realizing when it happened, you stop needing closure from the people who once broke you. That is real growth, not when the pain magically disappears, but when your identity no longer revolves around someone returning. Because at first you think the goal is getting them back, but eventually you realize the real goal was getting yourself back, your confidence, your peace, your self-respect, your emotional stability, the parts of you that became lost while trying so hard to hold on to someone who was slowly letting go. And this is the irony nobody talks about. Sometimes the person finally comes back after you have already outgrown the version of yourself that once waited for them. They return when your energy feels lighter, when your life no longer revolves around their attention, when your happiness is no longer dependent on whether they text you, choose you, or validate you. Because people often feel your absence most strongly when you genuinely move forward emotionally. But by then, something inside you has changed. You no longer look at them through the same desperate eyes. You no longer feel willing to sacrifice your peace just to avoid losing love. The emotional attachment that once controlled you has weakened because healing gave you perspective. You finally understand how much of yourself you abandoned trying to save the relationship. And that realization is powerful. Because when someone returns after hurting you, you begin asking different questions. Not do they still love me, but can they love me correctly? Not how do I keep them, but does this connection still align with the person I've become? And those questions come from emotional maturity. See, many people think winning means making someone regret losing you. But real winning is deeper than that. Real winning is no longer needing revenge, validation, or even reconciliation to feel valuable. It's reaching a place where your happiness exists independently from the people who once had the power to destroy it. And sometimes, the greatest closure is realizing you survived what you thought would break you forever. You became stronger, wiser, more emotionally aware. You stopped abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. You learn that love without respect will always leave wounds, and most importantly, you learn that your worth was never dependent on someone choosing to stay. So yes, sometimes they come back, but the real transformation happens when you finally understand that your peace matters more than forcing any person to remain in your life. Because the moment you become whole again, you stop fearing loss and start choosing yourself first.